welcome back, everybody. It's been a really unexpected and long break in sessions. Thank you for your patience. My goodness, as Martha said earlier, there's been a string of things that happened, mostly out of my control. So thank you, however, for being patient and being here. I'm excited to get back to it. Today we're going to be focusing on darts, adjusting your darts, positioning your darts, and stitching and pressing your darts. That's probably all we're going to get through, because I am still tracking post-COVID much more than I would like. It's really hard for me to accept that I'm so tired all the time. But I've heard from everybody that this is like really normal. So we're going to just move a little slow and get those in. And I think that in the past, I've not entirely breezed by darts, but I don't always take a lot of time with the darts. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity to really savor the dart experience. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna savor those darts. So, and
I'm glad you're talking about darts.
Yeah, no, darts. We're gonna savor the darts. I'd also like to savor a tart. That'd be great. I'm pretty keen, and a cup of tea would be lovely. It's also a million degrees here, so if you notice, I'm wearing like this additional little fan experience to try and like control the heat. It's a really like clearly a very sassy accessory, but don't come here in the summer. I love you all. Never come in the summer. It's terrible. So anyway, we're gonna get into it. I'm gonna try not to melt, and I'm just happy to be back with you all. I've missed you. So I hope you guys are doing okay. So let's talk a little bit about darts. Darts are one of the most easily adjusted things in a garment. So if you need to adjust your fit, darts are magical. When you look at darts on a pattern, I think I recall this as a new sewist when I was learning that I assumed I had to do the darts exactly as drawn, the size they were drawn at as on the pattern, the position, everything. I didn't know I could move them around. I also didn't realize that this is like a classic technique in a fitting adjustment is to like shift your dart positions, and you can kind of shift them all over the place on a garment. But today we're just looking at a skirt. This isn't like a really complicated dart manipulation. When you get into things like darts for busts, points, darts in a fitted bodice or tailored jacket, you get into much more exciting dart adjustments. But for us today, we're doing a very simple adjustment, and it's a good place to start with um, teaching yourself that you can mess with your darts. You can always adjust them.
Yeah. I actually have a dart related question, if I might. You may answer it whenever you want, but I'm going to throw it out there so that you know I'm interested in it. So you are a larger person on the bottom, as am I.
Yes.
So my question when you get to it is, at what point should you add extra darts? Like, what is the ideal width or length between darts?
Right. Okay.
Just a matter of where you're the most curvy.
Yeah. So this is a great question. And we are going to talk about it a little bit today, but I'm going to dive into it now because I do have to add extra darts to this pattern, actually, because my hip to waist difference, especially in a corset, is significant. I have a lot of junk in my trunk, and I cut my skirts for my widest point, which is my hips and my tush, like legitimately. And so I am really used to adding extra darts to account for that difference. And also so I don't get the dreaded like waistband gap that you'll find is a very common phenomenon for people who are hippie or have a very curvaceous, posterior and a snatched waist. Like when looking for jeans and trousers and skirts and things off the rack, the waist never fits if it has to also fit my hips. I always end up with this weird gap, sometimes large enough to stick an entire cat in that gap. So, one of the things I love about being a full figured person and making my own clothes is I can add those extra darts. So, to a certain degree, Martha, I look for the curviness of my figure and where I need more curve. But also, some of it is mucking around with the mock up and the pattern and seeing what you like and what is comfortable for you. With this particular pattern, there are like two specific areas where you can easily add darts. So that's super helpful right there. Kind of narrows down your options. That back panel of this bustle skirt is all pleated in to your waistband. So you can't really dart there, and you don't really need darts there because you're pleating it in. So the fullness of the fabric is already gathered in tightly in a way that that waistband is not going to gap away from your body. But here's the deal. This is an important piece of math to remember for this particular skirt. You have you're shooting for approximately 10 inches, give or take, across the back in which to gather all of that abundant fabric. 10 inches is not that much. Now, I'm a wider person, so I could go up to 12 inches and it would still look appropriate for my figure and for a balanced proportion. If you're a very slender person, you may wish to go down to 8 inches, but we're in this like sort of 10-inch, give or take, 2 or 3 inches on either side. It's not a lot of space when you're talking about pleating up or gathering in 45-inch wide fabric to 60-inch wide fabric into that space. Obviously, we're not doing that particular work today, but it's important to keep that in mind because you want the other 3 skirt panels to fit in to the remaining space you have available on your waistband. And that can help you discern, do I need additional darts? It's like a question of doing some math. You add together the top edge measurement of those 3 panels, which is center, front, and your 2 side panels. You take that amount and you subtract it from your waist measurement. And if you have less than 10 inches left over, you need to put more darts in. So that is like some simple mathematics there, a little arithmetic. If it's like you have 9 inches and not 10, you know, you don't necessarily have to put a whole new dart in. You can actually make a couple of your darts slightly wider instead. So we are also going to talk about like what's the break point between adding additional darts and just making a dart a little bit wider. So
yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. I'm going to give you a top-down view looking at my center front panel. And we may find ourselves shifting things around a bit. Oh my goodness, for a better view and for a view that makes more sense to everybody. Okay, here we go. All right, let's see if the camera cooperates with me. I feel a little out of practice because we haven't met in a few weeks. And so, and also my setup was disrupted by having a broken computer. So I feel very out of sorts today. So thank you for bearing with me. Okay. Okay, can you see this fabric and my work surface? Okay.
It just exactly fits width to width.
Perfect. So this is the center front panel, and this is my top edge of that panel. And currently, this is 19 inches wide, approximately. It's like it's 18 and 7/8 inches, but we're going to call it 19 because that's a much easier number to work with. So it's 19 inches wide. This is half my waist measurement right now. So I definitely immediately know that I need to take up some fabric here. I need to dart this. In her pattern, her darts are 1 inch wide, and for the largest size, they're about 3.5 inches on either side of center front. So one thing I do when I'm manipulating and putting in darts is I find the center point of my garment. Now, I have this kind of awkward dimension in that it's 18 and 7/8 inch wide. So it's a little hard to find exactly that center, but I'm going to go to 9. It's sort of in the close enough. It's probably like over by just the tiniest fraction, half of an eighth, so a 16th of an inch over. But we're gonna go with this is like roughly our center point, and hopefully your amount is more even than mine, or at least divisible easily by 2. So once I have my center point, I'm gonna go over that 3.5 inches. I'm just gonna make a little mark. So that does not leave me a ton of room on either side to add extra darts. So I have to think strategically about whether or not I'm going to just increase the size of my dart or add a second dart. Now, I really want to take out an additional 2 inches out of this front panel. You can do a 2 inch wide dart, but it is not as flattering as doing 2 1 inch darts. If you're going up to like an 1.5 inch wide dart, you're sort of still in that narrow enough to be attractive. Once you break over that 1.5 inch wide dart, you're sort of breaking into a pleat or a gather or 2 darts or some other kind of way to take in that fabric. We don't want gathers on the center front panel. We want it to be nice and smooth because for the bustle era, having a smooth front panel is just part of the silhouette. If you're doing something like an A-line skirt or one of the full mid-century skirts from the 1950s or 1960s, you could gather instead of dart and it would be fine. If you're doing something like a dirndl, gathers are your friends. But for this, darts are the thing that is going to give us a nice, smooth, tailored front. So I've already determined that a 2 inch wide dart is a little bit too wide. So I want to do a second 1 inch wide dart. So first I'm going to mark the points at which I'm going to put both of my legs for my dart. So the long lines are called legs when you're talking about darts. I think it makes sense because they're lines, and if you make a stick figure, legs are lines or whatever. Who knows what the tailors were thinking, but it sort of works for me. That leaves me approximately 4.5 inches on the other side of that dart to to put in a second dart. Now, I can actually chivvy up my dart just a half inch on the other side of that dart. So they're very close together, but that's okay. So they can be pretty close together. You don't necessarily want them to be on top of each other, but you can have them be a quarter of an inch apart or a half inch apart, and they'll still press up nicely. They'll still look nice, and they'll still do the thing you want. If you really have a very narrow space to the far side of your dart, you can scoot it in more towards the middle. You could like put another dart into the center region, especially if, you know, a lot of your fullness is like the center of your tummy and not the sides of your tummy. A lot of us who are over a certain age, you get what's called middle age spread. Things kind of spread outward towards your hips as you're sitting. And so putting the darts like a little bit on the side of center front is more flattering. But if that's not your experience, you can always move the darts a little bit more in. This is a good place if you're doing a mock-up or you're working with some lining fabric and testing for fit. This is a good place if you have an uncertainty about where your darts are going to go, to just baste them in and lay it over your torso and see if you like the way it falls across your torso. Kind of a quick fit check, if you will. But I know that I like my darts to the side of center front like this. So I'm happy with the position of the legs. And now it's time to draw in the darts. So her darts have 5-inch long legs, which is very standard. Or rather, I should say they're 5-inch long darts. So that's a very standard dart length. You'll find darts that are longer, that are shorter. Once you get into fisheye darts, one of my favorite darts in the universe, the world's your oyster in terms of the length of your darts. I've had some darts that are like 12, 15 inches long in a fisheye dart. So when I am getting ready to put in the legs of my darts, I want to find the center of my two dart legs. And in this case, my darts are all 1 inch wide. Makes it really easy. I just need to find the half-inch mark. And I'm going to just draw down 5 inches, a straight line. So I'm using Frixion pens. Let me know if you can see this color. I can get a darker color if you can't.
I can see it a little bit.
I can make it a bit darker. Let's see if this red shows up better. So I'm using the Frixion pens because they do, essentially, for my purposes, they do disappear in the process of creating the garment when I go in and iron it. If you live in an extremely cold climate and you think that your marks are going to end up on the front side of your garment, then Frixion pens may not work for you. But for most of us, these lines are never going to reappear because it will never get cold enough. So once I've got my center line drawn in, I'm going to go to my little marks I made. For lining up my legs, I've got one on either side of midpoint. I'm going to just take the edge of my ruler, line it up with the little hash mark, and then I'm going to angle it to line up with the end of my middle line that I created. So now I've got my little dart leg. I didn't quite close the gap, so let's go in there. So now I've got my little dart leg on the first side. I'm going to repeat that exactly for the second side. So now I've got my first dart drawn in. I'm going to repeat that for all 4 of these darts. So one of the things I'm doing to help keep everything in line and pointing the right direction, the top edge of my skirt panel is straight. And so I'm lining up the top edge of my ruler with the top edge of the fabric. So everything is perpendicular to this edge. You kind of, for these darts, you want them to be on the grain. Some darts, they're on the bias or the grain doesn't matter, but these are intended to be on the grain. Come on, little pen. Oh. All right, my pen is dying a little bit. Number 2 pencil is also an excellent marking tool for this kind of thing. I also use chalk markers depending on the kind of fabric I'm using and whether or not I need, white to show up against a dark fabric. But often I go to the Frixion pens because they give me a nice fine line. Even when I'm not teaching a class, this is my order of operations where I just go in and draw in all of the darts at once. I'm very fortunate in that I've made this garment frequently, so I already know where I like my darts to be roughly, but I have had a lot of body changes. So I do need to pay more attention to like how many darts I need, the actual adjustment on the width of things, all of that, because, the hernia has changed my shape. I don't love that, but also it sort of is life. And so even when something is irksome or frustrating, my body's a good body. It's doing all the things a body should do. And if I take the time to fit my garments, I'll look great. And that's true for all of you. Like, fit is the sovereign of the experience. I know that the fashion industry is obsessed with telling us it's about the number on the tag of your garment that you get off the rack. But the truth is actually it's about how the garment fits you, not about that number. So regardless of where you fall on any line of numbers, if the garment is a poor fit, you're gonna look sort of slapdash or like the garment doesn't fit you or uncomfortable or whatever. It's just getting that fit right. And a lot of off the rack garments don't really fit anybody's body particularly well. So it's nice to be able to go in, learn to sew, kind of step back from that idea that the size matters and hone in on how fit matters. And I love darts for that. So, speaking of darts, you may have the opposite problem that I do. You may have a wider waist measurement or a smaller ratio between your waist and your hip. You may not need this many darts. Or you may need narrower darts, or you may not need darts. That is all totally fine. It is about making sure that the ratio works out so that you've got enough room in the back of the waist to add in that big panel. Now, my personal experience is that everybody needs at least two of these little darts because we all have a curvy tummy. That's very normal. So if you're somebody who needs a little bit less of a dart, you can make these 3/4 of an inch wide instead of an inch wide and just have a narrower dart. I've also done darts that are like a 1/2 inch wide, but they are a pain in the tuchus at that point. So I'd rather work with like a 3/4 inch wide dart than a 1/2 inch dart if I can manage it. So, all right, we've got our 4 darts in the front. Now that I've subtracted 4 inches from that front panel, it's instead of being 19 inches wide, it's going to be 13. No, 15 inches wide. I can do math. So now I've taken this down to 15 inches. Um, that's a little bit more appropriate for the garment ratio. I'm going to set this to the side. We're going to look at our side panels now. I do not always, but sometimes I need to add a dart to the sides of my garment, this side panel. Now, I've made my life a little bit more tricky because I'm going to be piecing a bit of fabric here to sort of fake out that I'm not making the entire skirt out of silk. I'm only making the visible portions out of silk to save money. So typically, depending on the shaping, I try and get my dart just into the muslin so that I don't have to worry about darting the silk. But honestly, I think I need my dart a little bit more forward, looking at the shape of this and just understanding that my my hips are very hippie. And so I kind of need this dart to be in the center of the panel and not too far back in the panel. Just going to measure this panel. So the top of this panel is 11 inches, well, almost 11 inches. It's 10.5 inches wide, which is great. At least that is a nice round number. So I want to find the midpoint of this, which should be 5.25 inches. So I'm going to find that midpoint. So very awkwardly, that is right where I intended to put the silk panel. And I don't really want to have half a dart on the silk panel. I either want to do a whole dart on the silk portion or no dart on the silk portion. I don't want to try and like work in half a dart onto my silk. So,
Would you ever consider just making the dart on the seam there?
oh,
Like because the edges of the panel are curved in a little bit, right?
yes. Yeah, you could. So, this is a great question. The question Martha is asking is if you could just sort of work in your darts right here and like just curve, essentially curve your panel more.
Yeah.
Um,
Or like right
honest,
along that line you already drew.
or this line. Yeah. So what I'm
Yeah.
saying is because of the way I'm planning, this isn't really a seam here. This line, it's just a grid to show me how far in I want that silk panel to cover the base layer of the muslin.
Oh,
And
okay.
and so I could put a dart here that like bridges over the silk and the muslin, but then I'm going to get potentially a little bit of a weird bulge because the
Oh,
fabric isn't the same on both sides. And so I'll be like potentially a little bit wonky. Um, so a good option honestly is if you're just looking at needing to take in, let's say a half inch or a quarter of an inch in this side panel, you could absolutely just go in here to your front edge that connects with your center front panel and take in that half inch at the top and ease in a little curve and just make your this hip a little bit more curvy into your waist. That is a perfect little adjustment. It's a quick adjustment and it's not properly a dart at that point, but it's sort of it's like you moved the dart from here and moved it into your seam allowance instead. So that's for a narrow dart, that's a great option. If you feel like you're looking at, I'm looking at taking out an inch of fabric. I could potentially go in an inch here and curve it out more. But then there's like a little bit more challenge grading that curve into the side seam. So it's totally feasible, but you'll probably want to get out a curved ruler to help you out. So you get a nice shape to it.
yeah. But in this situation, the place where that's pretty far from where you were proposing the dart be halfway.
Yes. So I feel like for my figure, having the dart in the center of the panel works a little better because I do have a pronounced hip. Um, if your hip it like I had just I what do they call I have big love handles. And so I know that about myself. And so that's where like there turns into this big curve is kind of the center of my panel. But if your hips are like not so pronounced, if your curve is again still more forward towards the center of your body over your tummy area, then doing this kind of adjustment here at the front edge of the panel um, is going to line up better for adjusting over your tummy. So it kind of depends on your personal figure shape where you need to make that adjustment. But for me, because of my shape, I find doing the dart in the center of the panel just gives me a little bit of a nicer drape overall. Because I'm doing this thing where I'm cheating out my fabric, rather than centering my dart exactly in the middle of the panel, I'm actually going to have it be just a little bit forward of center front. gonna give myself say I'm gonna give myself an inch forward from that center point, or rather from this point where my edge of my silk panel is going to be. I'm going to make another 1-inch dart here. Good questions, Martha. By the
Oh,
by.
I've had months to save up, not months, weeks to save up.
Almost. I mean, it's been a month, so you could say months. We like the drama here, but yes, it's true. We've had some time to think about all the things. I'm so happy to be back and sewing. I just, we just went to costume college and had a marvelous time, honestly. I've been 3 times now, and Captain Azar and I just love this convention because it's full of people who make costumes at all levels of costume making and across a variety of interests for costume making. So not everybody's doing historical stuff. But there's lots of historically inspired, there's lots of vintage. It's really delightful. But one of the things about doing this convention is I always come home and I want to make all the things. I find it very, very inspiring. And I have to say that I found this to be the best year we've done so far. And we're already planning to go back in 2026. We can't afford to do it every year, but if you're thinking of putting it on your calendar, I hope you will think about coming in 2026. Cake, your timing is impeccable. Oh my gosh. Right as I was going to move the fabric, my darling. I guess that's my sign to take some water. Cake, what am I going to do with you? So let's talk about what we can before I move the cat. So I've made a lot of marks on this, but this one right here is going to be my dart. I think if I had a slightly different shaped figure, if I didn't have such pronounced hips, I might do this change here that we were talking about, where I just curve a bit off of the front edge of the panel to make it a little bit curvier. You can also, you can do a 1/2 inch from the front edge of your side panel. And then you can also do a 1/2 inch from the back edge of your front panel where they join to essentially put a little dart into that panel seam between them. So you divide the full inch across the 2 panels. That's also an option. If you're going to do something like that because you feel like more of your volume in your torso is towards the front, then okay, you're such a mess. You're a very cute mess, but you're such a mess. So you can see how they line up here with our little oh my gosh, these little things. I always
Darts?
forget that. Yeah, thank you. Our little
Carrots?
the carrots, thank you. So when the little carrots meet up, that's where this roughly meets up. And so I normally justify my panels from the top edge, to be honest, and then I fix things at the hem. But you just want to make sure that your little adjustment matches up in terms of length and shape. And you can see how that's a very similar shape to a dart, but now it's spread across a seam And so when we go in and stitch that up, we're going to have a slightly more curved seam, almost like we've put a third dart into this run of the front. So it curves it a little bit more over your tummy area. But I want more curve over my hips, so that's where I'm putting mine. And I'm erasing these marks so that when we go in, it's a little bit less confusing. Cake, you're so cute. He's also happy we're back in class and working together. He's missed this. He loves lying around on people's fabric and helping. Hi, Cake.
So do we have to say, oh, what a pretty kitty?
Yes, he would like that. Yes. Yeah, I know. You're such a good boy. You're so good. Okay, so let's look at how I mirror this dart onto my other panel. Sometimes you just need to measure the distance and repeat your measurements on the other side. If it's very simple and the shape of your panel is very simple, you can actually just layer your panels and then come up and mark where your dart legs go in. And then you can go to the other panel and easily transfer them without any measurement. But if when in doubt, always measure. Measuring is great. And you only have to measure to the first dart leg because we know the width. So as long as you know where that first dart leg is in relationship to the edge of your fabric, you're fine. Mr. Cake, I have to move you now. I need to put in my other dart marking so we can go stitch some darts. Is that okay?
No.
No, no. You're such a darling boy 90% of the time. Come here, my darling. I know. I put your coverlet on the stool. So here we go. We're on this other side. And I've made a lot of marks for myself. And I'm just going to transfer those marks. I can also go in here and confirm it should be 4 inches over. And it is 4 inches, so I've done a good job. And I want my dart to be 1 inch wide. And I want the midway point to be halfway there. So same as the other side. All of these darts are 5 inches long. When we get into making a tailored bodice, and probably what's going to happen right now, what I'm considering doing next year is a tailored bodice and a waistcoat as projects together. And both of those require more dart manipulation. So you move your darts all over the place and you make some really interesting shaped darts. And I'm excited to get into that with you all. But this is like still a good starting point for learning to adjust your darts and manipulate them a little bit to improve your fit. So once we have these traced in, it's time to go in and stitch them. So we're gonna be moving over to the regular sewing machine situation to do that. Very exciting. But before we go there, I'm going to check our time and also check in with you guys to see if you have any questions about what I've done so far with positioning the darts.
I have a vanity question.
Yes, please ask me your vanity question.
Well, I like how sometimes there's a long dart next to a short dart.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I don't really know as if that would matter on my body because my body, I mean, I don't have like a lump sticking out at a certain place that would require me to have a shorter dart and a longer dart.
Right.
But it
Right.
does look kind of nice.
It does. So if you want to do that, it's aesthetically pleasing. Then I think gosh, Martha, I think you could
I
just
see it a
make
lot
one
on
dart.
bodices. But what?
Yeah, I see it a lot more on bodices than I do necessarily on skirts, but I've seen it on skirts too. And I think doing one dart at 6 inches long and the other at 5 is very attractive ratio to just to have that 1 inch discrepancy is nice. And it probably varies by your body shape and where you carry your weight in your torso. For me, I'd probably do the shorter dart towards the inside, towards center, and do the longer dart on the outside, um, towards my hip, so that I'm giving a little bit more fall, a little bit more room to my hernia. So, yeah,
Yeah, that's what
absolutely.
I was thinking, the smaller one on the inside. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
should clarify that when I say I'm pretty smooth in that area, that's because of my corset. So,
Yes, the corset helps a lot. So so my corset also smooths things out a lot for me, even with the hernia. Um, but it still creates a few fit issues. And it's more noticeable when I'm like fitting the corset. And I feel like my last corset, I was very happy with the shape overall, but as I've worn it more, I didn't give myself enough hip spring on it to account for how things would shift when I sit, because the hernia does shift things a little bit more dramatically. And it does not squish out of the way in the same way as the rest of my flesh. So, when we do the corset class this autumn, I'll probably be working from that pattern I did last year and developing something that has a little bit more hip spring for myself. Um, and I'm excited about that. We're going to have such a good time. So, and I'm going to be coming up with some announcements about that class, by the by. It's just that my computer died when I was putting it together. So that really put a little fly in the ointment. But I'm excited. We're going to do a single layer corset. And as you say, however, to get back on track, the corset does help smooth things out below the waist as well. It depends on your style of corset and how far down your front torso that corset goes. Mine, I usually hit around the belly button because I have like, that thing that happens to lots of middle-aged ladies where my tummy has dropped a little bit, but also because of the hernia, I no longer have as much abdominal support for my tummy as I did. I think I probably notice it a lot because I'm trained as a classical singer and I'm used to having a lot of abdominal support actually. And so I'm just like, oh, what happened? I mean, what happened was I was getting out of bed. And I gave myself a hernia getting out of bed. So obnoxious. But I notice it. And so um, it is like it does adjust the way things move, even under the corset. And it adjusts where I put the edge of my corset. So this is sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but typically when I'm teaching people to make corsets, I encourage them to do a sit test, to sit in their corset and to make sure that they can sit and that bottom edge is not poking into the top of their hip or into their pubic bone, because that is really uncomfortable. There's going to be metal there. So it varies by your figure how long the front of your corset is going to be over your tummy and how much tummy control you have.
Yeah.
So this does pertain specifically to the skirts. And as something I was reminded of, and I kind of take for granted, um, in this period and in the sort of ideal silhouette, they're expecting you to have a little bit of a rounded tummy. They don't expect it to be totally smooth in the front. And so part of that is the nature of how corsets shift your flesh around. Um, you need a place for that flesh to go. I have had this conversation with cosplayers before who want to wear a corset with spandex to get like a Scarlet Witch or whatever. And they're like, what do I do about my tummy? And I'm like, this is really dissatisfying, I know, but embrace it. Like the illustrators in comics can smooth things out because they're not dealing with actual human flesh. And in film, the actors performing these characters have a lot of spandex on their body and also very little body fat because well, there's
Hollywood.
a lot to unpack with the entertainment industry and the beauty standards therein, but it's not how most of us actually exist in the world. So, for human beings who do not have an entire staff of people layering spandex onto them, you are going to have a little bit of a rounded tummy in your silhouette for bustle fashion with a corset. No matter what your body type, you'll end up with a little rounded tummy, and it's like nice, and it's what you want for the silhouette.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I'm
some of us.
hoping that I still haven't finished my corset, but the ready-made corsets that I have, they sort of go like, because a lot of the Victorian corsets, they come in and then they
Yeah,
go out. And so
yeah.
mine comes in and then goes like, whee! So,
Oh,
so I'm hoping that this new one is actually a little more flat, or maybe, so it'll come in and then not really like it can come back out, but it's
yeah.
not going to do this thing. It'll just come down. That's, I
Yes.
think, what we finally did on number 6.
Yes. Yes, that's kind of what you want.
Yeah.
Also, it's not something I do, but some corsetiers like softly mold their busk and bend their busk to have more of a curve over their tummy. Um, I haven't done it because I'm concerned about breaking my busk doing it. Um, but my corsets, as they break in, tend to sort of slowly develop that curve over the tummy. And so working that into your pattern and planning for that is a good idea. So, and Martha, if you haven't finished your corset by September, you can always jump back in with us and like come along for the ride while you finish yours. I'd love to
Oh,
see, you
I'm
know.
gonna do that. I just, you know, things happen. Like suddenly there's a pirate
Yes,
weekend, and I
right.
have to finish my pirate hat.
Absolutely. Listen, 100%. And since we're on a tangent, originally the plan was finish this skirt and then do like chemise and split drawers before we do the corset. Because of my illness, there's no way we're going to get that chemise and split drawers in before the corset, which is not ideal. It's great to have a chemise to put on for fitting your corset, but it'll probably be a post corset adventure. Um, but yeah, sometimes things come up and your schedule goes cattywampus and you can't finish things in the time you thought, or something more pressing comes up, or you're just like, this isn't working. I'm going to do something that's a little bit more fun right now and come back to the project that's making me cocoa banana pants today. So
Yeah.
we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also been helping my mom a lot. That's why I'm at my mom's house, not my house.
Oh,
So,
oh, I was wondering.
So I come over here with all the best intentions, oh, I'll have all this time and uh, I'll do all this sewing. And I've been ironing. Some of my projects have been sitting so long, I have to re-iron all the fabric.
Yeah, I feel that. Honestly, all of this has been sitting to the side waiting for us to get back, and it now has wrinkles in it that it did not have before. So, before I apply the silk fabric, I'll have to make sure everything is really beautifully pressed, for instance. But yes, like, this is life, and sometimes life is frustrating.
Yeah.
But I think at least here, we all know that this is life. And so you guys are very patient with me when life happens, but also in turn, I'm going to tell you it's okay. Alicia, you were going to say something. I know it was going to be good.
No, if I show you my pile right now, it's just falling over, and it's not falling over, but there's just a big pile of unassorted fabric and patterns that need to be sorted through and to projects, and it's just a mess.
I mean, listen,
I have stuff everywhere.
Solidarity,
but,
Alicia.
I got pleats done.
Yay,
on the
please.
front.
Yay,
well,
please.
I gotta press them and sew them, but yeah. So
hey, this is good success.
But hey, hopefully I'll get it done before Halloween so I can wear it. Because it's a skirt that I had to remake because it didn't fit me anymore.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
And it's this wonderful Henry Alexander fabric from like a couple decades ago. You can't get anymore. And it's like,
oh, is it the one they were selling 40 or a third of a yard for $40? Which one is it?
Yes, it might be. It's the Edward Gorey-esque.
I'm gonna show everybody what this fabric looks like. Please show us. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. It's the Edward Gorey-esque stuff. Yeah. I regret not buying more when I saw it at Hancock's, but I bought enough for a skirt, and that wrap skirt no longer fits me. So I had to take it apart, and I'm doing a 1930s. A 1930s? Yeah, it's probably more like 19 teens actually. Like shorter skirt with it.
Cute.
Yeah, because this I can probably in October, I could probably wear this to work in October and they'd be like, oh, okay. But it's also part of I have a pinstripe fabric. Then I'm gonna make a shirt with the big Gigo sleeves. 19 teens, Gigo sleeves don't go together. With steampunk, I can do whatever the hell I want.
That's correct. That is correct. You can do what you want.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make that, and I have to. Hopefully, I'll have enough of this left that I can make like a vest, like a vest front that would match it. But I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the skirt done at this point. But it's been here to be done for a long while.
I mean, honestly, one of these days I will try and remember to take you all on a tour of the workshop, video tour, and I can show you all of the like hopeful bins of future dream projects that I want to get to. And for me,
totes.
Oh my gosh, so many totes. Some of my projects, I'm actually happy they ended up languishing and waiting because my body has changed so much in the last 4 years. And I'm really glad I didn't make all the things I thought I was going to make in 2020. They wouldn't fit right now, and I'd be really sad. So I'm glad I did more caftans because they're very forgiving. They still fit.
I was going to say about your hernia. The more I watch these people, costumers, the more I watch them, the more I find that almost every single one of them has a body issue.
Yes.
Right? So like there's two, like Bernadette Banner and somebody else has scoliosis. A couple people have swaybacks. And someone, what was it? No, it was another scoliosis person actually. um the I don't remember the name of everything, but everybody's like, well, my back has this problem. Oh yeah, 3 people. I think it was Christine Sosteen, I think,
Oh,
was the one I heard yesterday who has
mm-hmm.
scoliosis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she does.
And then the she has red hair and she's Jewish. Anyway,
Oh, the Snapdragon.
Snappy
Okay.
Dragon. Yep,
Okay.
she also has scoliosis. So anyway, I just keep, all these people who do this for a living is like, if they can make it look,
Yes.
and they're dealing with all of these, irregularities, we can do it too. So
Absolutely. Well, I can't speak for them because I don't
because you're not
really,
them.
I'm not them. I've had the pleasure of like briefly meeting Sosteen at Costume College years ago, but she would not remember me. It was like 30 seconds. I was like, I like your work. We waved and like that was it. But like I don't know them. However, I think that for me and a lot of people I know who get into teaching and sharing our experience, we got into sewing because we had some fit issue that we couldn't find a solution to in ready to wear. In my case, I had multiple fit issues. I have a lot of bosom. I have a really narrow back. I have a long waist, but I'm a short person. Now I have a hernia. That sort of gap between my waist and my hip used to drive me crazy when I was buying ready to wear clothes. And so all of these things led me into making my own clothes so I could try and have something that fits for me. And it's taken me years to learn tricks to really start achieving the fit I want. But I feel like part of my responsibility or something I love to do anyway is to share honestly about that. Because when I was sewing for other people, so often someone would come into my workshop to get measurements, to get fitted for a garment, and they would start apologizing about things about their bodies. And there's nothing to apologize for. All of our bodies are unique. Nobody has a body shapes like what's on the rack in a store. Those are all medians that are smoothed out across a very small range of body samples that are from like young, fairly healthy white folks from like the 1940s and 50s. Like, truthfully, none of us are shaped that way. And so it's such a limited array. But people routinely would feel like there's something wrong with me that my body's not shaped like that. And so I feel a strong need to share that I am not symmetrical, that I have challenges, and to also share the ways in which I approach those challenges so that other people maybe don't have to reinvent the wheel, but also maybe you feel better because you're not alone. And now you've seen my costumes. I think I look pretty good in costumes. I think I make some really beautiful things. I generally feel great when I'm dressed up. And if I can do it, you can do it. If I can feel great, you can feel great in costumes. If I can adjust for my figure, you can adjust for your figure. It's sort of like my premise. And I'm assuming that that's similar to the motivation for these other folks. I could be wrong. I'm not in their head, but that's my assumption. That said, I do still sew for the Grand Arbiter. He has scoliosis.
Oh.
His is uh, fairly pronounced, actually. He now has to do a certain regimen of exercises to keep everything in sync. But he has about, oh gosh, 2 inch difference between one shoulder and the other, depending on how he's doing on his exercise routine. And so when I'm being really kind, I fit things all the way around his body because certainly on the back, no two things are the same. It's not symmetrical. It's not mirrored. And scoliosis, that's like a particular problem of scoliosis where, your right and left side of your body are not the same. So you're going to have to fit all of the panels of a fitted garment for that side of the body. And you have, like, when I'm talking about this in corsetry and somebody has scoliosis, I'm like, make sure you mark that that's the right side and the left side, because you don't mess that up. Don't get that confused. Anyway, went off on a bit of tangent. Thank you.
No, it really is, I think, why a lot of people do so. I mean, I just hate boring. So you have to make not boring.
Right? Well, and you're a tall person, Alicia.
Yeah.
And
so if I find an on the rack dress that's floor length for me, I buy that sucker. Or if it's really expensive, I'll just wait because I know it'll still be there at the end of the season.
Yes.
Because the white cotton dress that I have, I saw that a couple of years ago and it was like $45. And I'm like, well, for a cotton eyelet dress that's lined in cotton, that's not terrible.
No, it's not.
But
honestly,
I found it in August for $20 on clearance because the bottom was very dirty because it had been, on the sales floor forever. But it was just dirt.
Yeah, it could be cleaned.
And I'm like, yeah, I'll take this for $20.
Absolutely. And like 45 was still a good price for that.
I
think because the fabric is, if you're making it yourself, you can't generally make it for that cost. The fabric is going to be more than that. But if you can get it on sale, if you can get it on sale, do that. I have the opposite problem. If I find something off the rack that fits me,
you have to buy it.
I have to buy it right then, because there are plenty of short, buxom femme people out there who are like, that fits me, I'm stealing it. Like, and I don't mean steal it. They're going to pay for it. They'll snatch it. But I can't wait. I can't do that. I also, if I do find things that fit me and are interesting and suit my style, if I can afford to buy them, I will, to reward the maker. I'm just like, listen, there's an audience. Please make more. Yeah. There's a few things that I picked up at full price because it's like, okay, this is really cute and this is probably not going to stay. Some other person is going to buy it and not appreciate it. So I'm just the worst. So we're going to be moving to sewing here very shortly, but I'm going to share a story that really changed the way I approach buying clothes. I was living in Italy and I was just there for the summer as an exchange student to practice my Italian. It was great. I had a wonderful time. It was also a very affirming time because I'd never been flirted with that much in my life. And everybody thought I looked great all the time. So to move from Texas in the 90s, where everybody was like, oh my gosh, your body is terrible, I could never date you, to Italy, where they were like lining up. And I was like, I'm leaving in 3 months. I can't possibly. I'm here to learn the language, not date all the time. It was very affirming. And I was able to find quite a few clothes there at a great price that fit me really well, which was also like such a change from my experience in Texas in the 90s. But here's the thing. I was on a college student's budget. I didn't have money to buy lots and lots of clothes. I couldn't just be shopping all the time. I had very minimal dollars for frivolous things. And so when I was in Florence one weekend, I went to the big market they have there, which also happens to be an incredible place to buy. It's amazing. It's an amazing market. It's open air and there's everything. books, antique books, lace, fabric, all this stuff I think back to now as a sewist. I'm like, oh, I would have
I'm like,
gone
why are you living in
bankrupt.
Texas and not in Italy?
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
What a great
Florence is a
question.
lovely city.
I love Florence.
I would go there again.
Oh, yes, in a heartbeat. So there are these leather merchants at this market, and the leather is very high end and it's beautiful. And the price is actually competitive. It's like, because there are so many, it's a luxury item, but not like a Ferrari kind of luxury item. And so I saw this gorgeous leather jacket with a peplum. It fit me beautifully. And I was like, oh, I couldn't possibly. I left it behind. I didn't buy it. And you know what? It's been 25 years, working towards 30 years since I was there.
Yeah.
And I still think about that jacket. And so one of the sort of things I learned from that was, if you find a garment that is so magical like that and fits you so beautifully, if you can swing it, don't walk away. Don't obsess over this garment for 25 years. I did ultimately get a leather jacket years later from Florence when a friend was there and they picked one up for me. But it was not the leather jacket. So I'll always remember the leather jacket that I walked away from. That said, yes, Martha, I often asked why I was living in Texas and not back in Italy when I was living in Texas. And I foolishly turned down an opportunity to go live more long term in Italy at the time, as an au pair. Now, I'm not bad with children, but I was sort of like, what do I know about being an au pair at the time? And I thought, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to move to Arizona, go to graduate school, and study here instead. So that is the path I followed instead. But occasionally I think about the divergent, parallel universe in which I decided to go live in Florence instead.
Well, you did come back to Arizona and study.
I did. And I did get married, and now I'm so much better and happier. So
And you're still in Arizona. So
I am.
So one of the two things worked out.
One of the two things worked out. I have amazing friends here. Captain Azar is one of them. I hate the weather though. Summer always makes me like less generous towards Arizona because the weather is so rough. But the winter is great. Winter makes me very happy to be here. So, all right, let us get back to sewing. We're gonna go until about 1 o'clock my time, so about 45 more minutes. We're gonna sew in at least one dart and look at we're gonna look at a good process for sewing in darts. There are lots of ways to approach anything in sewing. This is just a way I learned that I like, and we'll probably talk about pressing. And then when next we meet, we're going to start sewing panels together and put in a placket. So, but let's get these darts started.
Yeah, you actually just brought up something that I was thinking about.
Yes.
I had thought you said in the past that you ironed your darts down that center line. And then that's how you lined up the two legs.
Oh,
was that not you? Because if you use the friction pens, then those lines would go away.
Yes. Okay. So I don't iron the darts down the center line to match them up. What I do, which I'll show you, is I actually stitch down the center line. And I put a row of basting stitches there. But I mostly only do that when I'm lining the fabric. So if I were flat lining the center front panel on this, I'm not, because we all know I'm doing this much more ridiculous thing instead. But if I were, typically I sew down that center front line so that I catch the fashion fabric and the lining, and I really affixed them into one unit so that the fashion fabric doesn't slide around and my dart becomes kind of like it, inaccurate, and a little wonky. With a single layer of fabric, I can typically see my center front line. And so I do, or my center line on the dart. So I do use the center line. I do fold along that line. I might finger press, but I'm not going to press with an iron, to help me line it up. And then I do some fun things with pins, which we'll look at. You can also baste your darts, hand baste them, do all sorts of things to make sure they're lined up appropriately depending on your fabric, how woodgy it is, how fussy it is. If you have something that moves around on you a lot, you may need to hand baste. So for instance, if you're using silk velvet, you will need to hand baste. I speak from experience. Alicia's nodding. Yeah, no, listen, I love that fabric, but it will betray you. If you're using something like a chiffon, you may need to hand baste. With the chiffon, you may even need to hand finish your darts because it's so delicate. So sometimes you need to adjust for the fabric, but typically for something like this, where I'm working with a cotton muslin, that I don't need to be too fussy in order to line up my dart legs. But it is a little bit of a trick to line up those dart legs. So we are going to look at some ways I do this. Now, again, if you are flat lining your fashion fabric to your lining fabric, then you will want to basting stitch down that center line between the two dart legs. It will really benefit you. And if you're like, hey man, my markings are not strong enough for me to really see them, I'm really having a hard time finding that midpoint, you can still baste even when you're doing a single layer of fabric. The basting stitches will be hidden once your dart is completed. So you can always baste, but when I'm dealing with a single layer of fabric, typically the markings are enough as they are.
Okay. So. Yeah, I recently took apart a skirt that was too small. And when I took apart the darts, because I figured I'm just gonna straighten it all out, right?
Yeah.
And because I was taking other things apart and I just took the darts apart. Anyway, they weren't straight. They were like,
yes.
whatever. So
yes.
Any of your tips? Sewing down the middle is a good one.
Yeah. Sewing down the middle is a good one. Again, for some things, you just have to baste that dart. Some people will do like a ladder stitch between their two dart legs to connect them together in that way. And so they hand baste them with a ladder stitch, and that lines everything up. This is like a very couture approach to the dart situation. And it's really good for things like silk velvet, like, charmeuse. We never talk about charmeuse. I love that fabric. It's very decadent and luxurious to where it's a betrayer to work with.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It moves everywhere. It does not. I really appreciate Alicia's reactions because I know you know. But
like it's like a 5-year-old hyped on sugar.
Yes. Oh my gosh, charmeuse, absolutely. Another fabric that I love to work with that is like so fussy. I use it sometimes as flat lining for things that I want them to be soft and very light weight and thin, but very strong. Silk organza. like makes a gorgeous flat lining for things, but also it's like sewing with a cloud or sewing with dreams, because it just floats away from you as you're trying to work with it. It's like, what if I float over here? It's like, no, I pinned you. And it's like, that's nice. I laugh at pins. Only basting will do. So,
oh my goodness.
So for some of these things, you can use the spray adhesive. I don't know what everybody is doing for their fashion fabric. I know I've mentioned this in other places. I love the spray adhesive. I use it a lot. And when I go in to add my silk um, fabric to these panels, I will be using it. But I cannot spray this directly on the silk or it will mark the silk. So I spray it directly on the cotton instead, because it doesn't leave a mark on the cotton or the silk that way. So this stuff will work with things like dupioni and shantung and satin, as long as you don't spray directly on those fabrics. It can work fine with the polyester versions and the rayon versions of those fabrics, but I would say always test before you spray on a really visible part of the garment. Things it will not work with: velvet, velveteen. No, no, no. Anything flocked. Nope. Will not work. So there, it has limits, but that can also really help with some of these witchy fabrics. So yeah, getting a nice straight dart is like the adventure, right? It's the thing we're all hoping for. Unless the dart is meant to be curved. So I have like a couple of darts I've worked with in the past where the dart is actually curved, and but still, for those, they need to be symmetrically curved. Things need to line up and not look like dog legs. So here we go. Into the belly of the beast, as it were. Anyway, so but back to sewing. So let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and show you what it looks like when I baste down the center of the dart, because I know my situation is different from a lot of you all, because I'm going to be covering the front of my garment with all of these scales instead of flatlining it with fashion fabric. So the scales are sort of flexible. They don't need darts. They'll sort of, curve over that space. But typically, I would be flatlining this to my fashion fabric. So typically, this would be my set of steps. I would flatlining them together, and then I would go in and I'd sew the center of all of my darts to keep them lined up while I'm like working with the fabric. So also, typically what I do, when we'll look at this more when I go in to add the silk, is I go in and hello. We'll deal with you not turning on later. Okay. So typically I spray adhese everything together, and then I serge all the edges together to really keep it lined up and steady long term. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going in with a basting stitch length, so 4 millimeters for me, and I'm going to be just stitching straight down this center line. Let's pretend like I have 2 layers of fabric here, and I'm just making sure they're stitched together, and get everything actually lined up. I try and stitch right on the lines I've drawn. That helps me keep everything nice and symmetrical. The fun part of this is it is like you're just tracing things with thread. So I find that really helps to keep things sort of symmetrical. I'm going to stitch just past the end of my dart legs, like a stitch or two. And that helps me pull the stitches out later if I need to pull them out. And also it makes sure that everything is nice and pinned together. So once I've got that in place, my basting stitches, I go in here and I'm going to just finger press right along that drawn in line where I've run my basting stitches. Like so. Now this muslin takes a press beautifully and it takes finger pressing really nicely. It's a very forgiving fabric. So now one of my tricks is to take my pin and I'm going to go in from the side facing me. I'm going to push straight in through the line. I'm going to come over to the back. I'm going to take the end of my pin and make sure it is lining up with the line on the other side. And then I push my pin back through. And now I know that at that point, they're symmetrical, they're lined up.
Oxy.
And I'm going to keep doing that all the way up.
Oxy.
You know what? Hold on a second here. I forgot to spotlight myself again. So I'm going to do that all the way up the dart. So I'm going to push my pin in through the line. I come here to the back. I make sure that my pin is also coming through the opposite side through the line that I drew in. And then I push my pin the rest of the way through. Now, it's always possible that there was drawing error and I didn't get things drawn perfectly symmetrical, but generally speaking, this makes sure that everything lines up properly. And then I'm not going to end up with a kind of weird shape that I did not intend. I also come down to my little tip, my final point, and just in front of that final point, I'm going to give myself the same thing, go through the line, make sure everything is lined up, and pin it in place. So now I'm ready to properly stitch my dart. When I stitch my dart, I want to use like a normal length of stitch. For me, that's 2.5 millimeters. I'm going to start at the wide end. So I have a modern machine. If you have a vintage machine you're working with, my goodness, they are a treasure. They are wonderful. I love working on a vintage machine. You cannot sew off your fabric with a vintage machine. This approach to putting in a dart on a vintage machine will not work. You cannot do it this way. If you approach it this way on a vintage machine, you'll end up with a jam in your machine, usually around the bobbin, and it's a mess. So you don't want to do that. If you're working with a vintage machine, you actually start from the narrow end and you work out to the wide end of your dart. And there's also a different way you thread your machine. You all, I love that that knowledge exists. It's not knowledge I'm strong in. It's not something I've done. I don't have practice doing it, so I can't demonstrate it. But if you need information on how to do that, because you're working on a vintage machine, it is out there. My friends at Twins and Needles work a lot with vintage machines. And so they often have some information about that. Anyway, so here we are. We're at the wide end of our dart. I've dropped my needle and I'm sewing right on the line that I traced. I'm going to give myself a little back tack at this end. And then I'm just going to sew straight along the line. I'll pull out my pins as I go. Remember, slow and steady wins the race. Especially if you're dealing with woodgie fabric, it's better to go slow than fast. As I come up towards the end of my dart, I'm actually going to sew right off the edge of the fabric. Like just a stitch or two. You don't want to sew forever, but you do want to sew right off the edge of the fabric. Okay, so I sewed with a nice purple so you can really see that line. And you can see on the other side, everything is still pretty symmetrical and straight. I kept things pretty lined up. And now I've got all of these threads at the bottom edge of my dart. So I'm going to take my 2 threads from what I just stitched, pull out that basting thread. You don't want to catch your basting thread. Pull them apart. Sometimes that basting thread is really persnickety. It just really wants to be involved. Listen, you. I say that because my basting thread is being really persnickety. So grab the 2 threads from the stitch line you just created, and you're just going to tie a knot by hand in this. You want to like tie it so that it's very close to the fabric. It's pretty tight. Joanne's not here, but Joanne is the queen of knots and would have good advice on knotting. But now that we have knotted that, we can trim off our threads. I usually just do like a little double knot. I leave a little bit of a tail, not a super long tail, but a little bit of a tail there. And if I'm concerned about my basting stitches down the center showing at all, this is a good time to like pull them out. They really shouldn't show in the front, but in case they do. Now's your opportunity. I like to pull them out before I press. It just makes it a little easier to unpick those stitches. I could use a seam ripper. I do own one, but I took it with me to costume college and I haven't unpacked my kit yet from costume college. So just going to use my fingers and a pair of tweezers. All right, so once I've pulled out my basting stitching, this dart is ready for pressing. I am going to put in my second dart over here so that I don't inadvertently press the first dart and remove all of my marks as I'm showing you how to press things. This one I'm going to do without the center basting stitching because I don't technically need the center basting for my particular project, but I wanted to show you all. So see, here's what happens if you like pin willy-nilly. You may miss your mark. So I just take a moment, I pause, I make sure I'm pinning through the line, and then I push back through on the other side. It's the same process.
I know that you that those are some of those iron over pins.
They are.
Are they also silk pins? They look very skinny.
They are also silk pins. I honestly, I just happen to have the silk pins in my pin cushion, and I love them. They're wonderful. They're very sharp. I also have these iron over pins in like a longer length and a wider gauge. I like the big ones for doing pleating and things like that. They're great though. They're a little bit more expensive than your average pin, but I find them worth it because the comfort grip really is comfortable. If you don't want to invest in these guys because they are a little spendy compared to most pins, just get some glass head pins. I also get these guys on WowWack, and I get them in white because, and the glass head pins you can also press right over, and they work a treat for this.
But the silk pins would be less likely to shift your fabric.
That's true.
When you're folding them, right? Or yeah, pinning it.
It's true. And also they're certainly not going to make really big holes in your fabric. So depending on what you're working with. The silk pins were really the same cost as the bigger gauge pins. And so when I was buying, I just bought a bunch of the silk pins. I work so often with silk. It was nice to move into having silk pins. And they do make a difference. I was kind of surprised by how much that turned out to be the case. So I really like them. They are also wildly sharper than my average pins. And so if I stab myself with a silk pin, I will bleed. And if I step on one, same. So just keep in mind that these guys are very sharp.
Yeah, I have some silk pins from Joann's that I got a couple of years ago. They have like blue crystals and white crystals at the top.
Oh, nice.
But they do, I tend to pin a lot, and so I was constantly poking myself.
Yes.
With those little shard of glass needle heads.
Yeah, no, these are nice because
or
it's
pinheads, I should say.
Yeah, the pinheads are not going to poke you. They're like a hardened silicone or something like that that is up to the heat. And there's also enough pinhead that if you have tendonitis or arthritis or just your hands are tired, they're a little easier to grip.
Okay, that's helpful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm fortunate I don't have a lot going on, but I am starting to get a little bit of arthritis in my hands. And more than anything, my hands just get tired. And so it's nice to ease some of the strain on them when I'm doing like a lot of sewing. I'm not a massive pinner, as you know, Martha. When I can get away with not pinning, I do. I love clips. I also love hubris, apparently, but pins are important, and sometimes you just really need to pin a thing. And having quality pins, they're like such a cheap investment overall for the amount of difference they make in your life as a sewist. It's worth it to have nice pins. Also, as an aside, for those of you who are sort of starting out on this adventure, you're your pins will wear out. You will have to replace them. They'll bend, they'll break, they'll get dull, whatever. You will not have the same pins for all of your life. So it's good to have a lot of pins. And it's when you have $5 extra and you need to up your order at WowWack, get more pins. So,
Pins
all right.
rust. At least old ones do from your grandma.
Yes, pins can rust.
I learned that the hard way.
So pins can rust. Also, when we get into some of the decorative elements of this project and we look at pleats and setting pleats and doing all the things, we're going to be working with a vinegar solution to help set our pleats, at least for some things, not for everything. Don't do that on your shot silk. You will be so sad. We'll talk about that more, but like vinegar solution is great for setting pleats and things like cotton and wool and linen, and it just does a beautiful job. However, it is caustic. It will etch, it will dull, it will destroy your pins. And so I usually keep around some pins that are like on their last legs. And this is going to be their last hurrah. And when I get done with them, they need to go in the trash because they've been destroyed by that vinegar. And heat is sort of the combination of vinegar and heat. But yeah, the old pins will rust and leave marks on your stuff. And sometimes you can't get those marks out. So, all right. So our last step, now that we've sewn in the darts and normally I do the whole panel. I don't stop with just one side. For the sort of efficiency of time, we're just going to do the 2 darts I've already stitched. So I go in and I press them, and it varies by garments, the direction that you need to press your darts. So I suggest always checking for the directions if they have a particular way they want your darts pressed. But fairly commonly, you press away from your center point. You press towards the outside of your body. Not always, but often. And sometimes if you have darts that are like on the vertical rather than the horizontal, you're going to have to press in a different direction. So we're going to press these. I like to use a tailor's ham for this because the darts are not curved, but they are also not flat anymore. The fabric is now starting to have a curve to it. And you've got a wide end and a narrow end. And having a tailor's ham really helps work with this new geography of the panel of fabric. Okay. Oops. Here we go. Oof. Oh man. I love this dress, but sometimes this dress catches on things. Oh. And then I can't move very far without tearing it, and I don't want to. Okay. Hey, Masala. You here to help? Yeah, you're going to help me press things? That's very kind. I know. You're my good girl. Hi, buddy. She loves this pressing table so much. It's her special spot. So, since I'm working with cotton, I want a nice hot iron. I want a steamy iron. If you're working with satin, polyester, rayon, fibers, acetate, you are not going to want to use the same high heat that I am using. If you're working with silk or linen or wool, you can go pretty high heat on that. I know sometimes with silk, they're like, oh, you don't need that high of a heat. Silk is an insulator. Silk loves heat. Don't be shy. Use that heat. Do use a pressing cloth if you're going to be pressing hard and a lot. The big thing you're worried about is scorching your fabric. So, Masala, hi, buddy. Hi. For this, it's cotton muslin. It's going to be covered by things. I'm not worried about scorching it. I'm not worried about anything with this fabric. I can really abuse it. It's going to be hidden. But if you're working with your fashion fabric, you do want to take some care. So I've got my tailor's ham here. We've got our narrow end and our wide end. The narrow end is for places where you've taken up more fabric, and the wide end is where the fabric breaks open again. Which means when I'm doing my darts, I want the wide end of my dart to actually be placed over the narrow end of my tailor's ham. And the narrow end of my dart is directed more at the wide end of my tailor's ham. So they're kind of like mirror opposites. Okay. I do want to get it sort of smoothed out over my tailor's ham. So don't, I look for the place where the fabric breaks the smoothest over the ham. And so I don't want to have it be way far back and then get like a weird tenting or anything like that if I can help it. My tailor's ham needs restuffing. I think it's a little flat. It's been abused a lot. So then I sort of pull everything into position. I'm going to press one dart at a time. Just give it a nice little press. I'm pressing out from the center towards the side seam. I repeat for the second darts. So once I've done the underside, I flop it over, and I also want to press it from the front. Now, I'm not getting any weird bubbles. I'm not getting any weird gathers or anything like that. Sort of the goal with your darts is you don't want to have any sort of weird accidental pleating up of fabric at the bottom of your dart. You want it to sort of release smoothly. Now, my release is not quite as smooth as I'd like it to be on this. May have something to do with how I tied my knots, but it's pretty good. And a lot can be done with the power of your iron. So go over these places, make sure it's nice and crisp and smooth. And now my darts are in and they are ready for action. So you're going to do that with all of your darts. If you are adding fashion fabric to your flat lining panels, add the fashion fabric first, make them one unit, flat line them together, and then put in your darts. It's okay to go ahead and trace in your darts on your lining before you do that. I typically do, frankly, trace in my darts on the lining fabric before I flatline it. I think it's just habit. There's not a necessity to do it in that order, but also like the fabric is smaller, there's less bulk going on. It's just easy to do it when I'm cutting out and prepping my flat lining. Once you have flatlined this fabric to your fashion fabric, everything we do going forward is going to treat them as one unit. They will become married together forever till death do them part. Starting the next time, I will be showing you how I'm going to do some flatlining of my fashion fabric to these panels. I'm going to talk about how you would do full panels rather than like cheating out your fabric as I am doing. It's a similar technique. I actually have a little bit more fussiness with mine because I have to finish additional edges that I would not normally need to finish. But it's basically the same techniques to do the flatlining. So we're going to go over that next time. So don't feel like, oh no, I haven't flatlined anything. It's all right. I wanted to show you darts today. It's a sort of when I'm not feeling entirely well, as I'm still very tired. This was a little bit of an easier task to accomplish than the flatlining. Flatlining is a lot more fabric manipulation, cutting. It's a lot more loft and standing and moving around between machines. So I wanted something a little bit more focused today, but we are going to get into that flatlining next time. And once we've got things flatlined, we get to start constructing the body of the skirt, adding in our pockets, adding our placket. The skirt starts to come together very quickly. So I'm excited to get into those next steps with you guys. Thank you for joining me today. It's so good to be back with everybody. And Captain Azar, thank you for recording the video for us today because my computer is dead. So we will get videos posted to Patreon once I have a more reliable workstation again. So there is going to be a delay in the videos. All right, take care, everybody. See you next time.